Welcome children, take out your Longman Impression book, Part 7, Chapter 3, Getting Ready for Adventure. This story is adapted from Miguel de Cervantes' novel Don Quixote, one of the most entertaining works of literature to emerge from Spain. Now this story is taken from Miguel de Cervantes' several novel Don Quixote. It is one of the most entertaining work of literature to come from Spain. Many years ago, there lived in Spain a very old-fashioned gentleman whom you would have been glad to know. Now, many years ago, in Spain, there lived a very old-fashioned gentleman. Everyone will become very happy to know about him. This gentleman had so many odd ways and did so many strange things that he not only amused his neighbors and distressed his friends, but made himself famous throughout the world. Now, this gentleman, he lived in such a odd ways, or his deeds were so odd that he did many strange things that it not only amused his neighbors or distressed his friends, but he himself made himself famous throughout the world. What his real name was. Now, what was his real name? No one outside of his village seemed to know, but outside the village, no one knew his real name. Some said it was this, some said it was that, but his neighbors called him the good Mr. Quisana, and no doubt this was correct. Now, his real name, no one knows. Some used to say this or says that. But his neighbor used to call him the good Mr. Quisana, and no doubt it was correct that he was good Mr. Quisana. He was gentle and kind and very brave. What type of man he was? He was a gentleman, a brave man, a very man, and even a kind man. And all who knew him loved him, and the people who knew him, everyone loved him. He had neither wife nor children. He was not a married man, so he had no wife nor children. He lived with his niece in his famous farmhouse, and he lived with his niece in his own farmhouse close by a quite little village in the province of La Mancha. He lived in his own farmhouse. His farmhouse was close to a very small village in the province of La Mancha. His niece was not yet 20 of age, and his niece, he was not more than 20 years of age. So the house was kept and managed by an old servant woman who was more wrinkled than wise and more talkative than handsome. Now, his house was looked after and managed by one old woman servant. She was wrinkled and wise. She was more wrinkled than wise and more talkative than handsome. A poor man who lived in a cottage nearby was employed to do his work on the farm. And a very poor man was there who lived in the cottage nearby, and he used to do the job. That means in his farm he used to work. And he did so well that his master had much leisure time and was troubled but little with the cares of business. Now, as all his work were done by others, so he had much free time and was but little with cares. But so he cares very less about the worldly affairs. Mr. Quisana was rather old in his appearance. Now, Mr. Quisana, he looked quite old in his appearance and dresses, as all old-fashioned gentlemen are apt to be, like other old-fashioned gentlemen look like. He was more than 50 of age and quite tall and slender. Now, his age was near about 50, means it was more than 50, and quite tall and slim body here. His face was thin and nose was long, and his hair was turning grey. Now, his face, here a thin face, long nose and grey hairs. He dressed very plainly, and he dressed very simply. On weekdays, he wore a coarse blouse and blue trousers of homespun stuff. Now, weekdays, what he used to do? He used to wear a homespun stuff, that is a coarse blouse and a blue trouser. On Sundays, however, he put on a plus coat and short velvet breeches and soft slippers with silver work. But on Sunday, he used to wear luxurious fabric coat with short velvet, short trouser, soft slippers with silver buckles. In the halfway of his old-fashioned house, a short, rusty sword was always active. Now, in his old-fashioned house, in the hallway of the old-fashioned of his house, there hung a short, rusty sword, and leaning against the wall were a rusty fence and big rawhide shield, and leaning against the wall there was a rusty weapon, that is a rusty metal weapon, and a big shield that was made of animal's hide. These weapons had belonged to his great grandfather. These weapons, it belonged from his great grandfather. He has inherited it from his great grandfather long ago, when men knew but little about guns and gunpowder. It belonged to that time when men had very little. Men knew very little and little about gun and gunpowder. On the kitchen doorstep, an old grey hound was always lump. Now, kitchen doorstep, they were always there lie an old grey hound. The dog was very lean and slender, and the dog, it was also very thin, very weak and thin. As his hunting days had long been past, and his hunting day, as he was quite old, his hunting days had long been past. But all old-fashioned gentlemen kept greyhounds in those days. With all old-fashioned gentlemen during those days, they used to keep this type of greyhounds in their house. In the barn, there was a horse as old as lean as the greyhound. Now, in barn also, he had a horse, and the horse was also too weak as the greyhound. But of this horse, I will tell you much more in the course of my study. But of this horse, the narrator had told much more story in the course of his story, much more about the course in the long-going course of his story. Like many other gentlemen, Mr. Quisana did not work much. Like other gentlemen, Mr. Quisana, he also didn't do too much of work. He spent almost all his time reading and reading and reading. Most of his time he used to spend in reading. He was seldom seen without a book in hand. Very rare he was seen that he had no books in his hand. Always it was seen he had books in his hand. When the weather was fine, he would sit in his little library or under the apple tree in the gardens and read all day. Now, during the fine weather, he used to sit in the little library or under the apple tree in the garden and read all the day. He often forgot to come to his meals, which was wrapped up in his book. Now, often he used to take his meals, which used to get wrapped in his book. That he forgot his horse, his dogs, and even the knees. Now, he used to forget always he seems as if he had forgotten all his horse, dogs, even his knees. He forgot his friends, he forgot himself. Sometimes he sat up and read all night. Now, he was so much interested in studies that he used to forget everything, that is his meals, which used to be wrapped in books. He used to forget his horse, dog, knees, friends, and sometimes he used to forget himself only, and he used to be seen in reading all the night. Now, what kind of books do you suppose he read? Now, what type of books he used to read? He read no histories or books of travel. He cared nothing for poetry or philosophy. His whole mind was given to stories of knights and their daring deeds. Now, he never used to read the history books of travel. Never he cared nothing for poetry, philosophy. His whole mind only he used to read stories, that is the story of knights and their daring deeds and their brave deeds. He read so many of these stories that he could not think of anything else. Now, he read such type of stories that he could never think about anything else. His head was full of knights and knightly deeds, and his mind, it was full of knights and their knightly deeds, of magic and witchcrafts, of tournaments and of filled with magic, witchcraft, tournaments, battlefields, all these things were his stories were filled with. At length, this old-fashioned gentleman said to himself, "Why should I always be a plain farmer and sit there?" Now at length he always used to say, "Why should I remain a plain farmer and there sit at home? Why may I not become a famous knight? Why can't I become a famous knight?" The more he thought about this matter, the more he wished to be a hero like those whom he had read in book. The more he used to think about this matter, the more he liked to be a hero like the knights. "Yes, I will be a knight," he said to himself. He said to himself that yes, he will be a knight. "My mind is fully made up. I will arm myself in a coat of mail. I will mount my noble steed and I will ride out to the world to seek adventure." Now he had set up his mind that he will become a knight, and his mind became fully, he has made his mind that he will arm himself. He will wear coat of mail and then mount his horse and then ride on to the whole world to seek some adventure. "No danger shall affright me, and no strong arm. No danger will frighten me, no any strong arm. I will go forth to protect the weak and befriend the friendless. I will go to protect the weak people and befriend the friendless people. Yes, I will be a knight and I will fight against the error wherever I find it." Yes, he thought in his mind that he will become a knight. He will fight against the mistakes wherever he would find. So he began at once to get ready for his great undertaking, and so he began ready to undertake his great undertaking. The first thing to be done was to find some suitable armor. The first thing he had done, it was to find a suitable armor. In the garret of his house, there was an old coat. Now, in the garret of his house, that is the small dark room. Garret is what? In the small dark room of his house, there was an old coat of mail. It was a very old coat. In the lane, there mounted the dusty and cobwebs were 100 years and more. And in the lane, there was among the dust and cobwebs for 100 years or more, rusted and battered, and some parts were missing. It was rusted, means strong metal weapons. It was rusted. His weapons were rusted and cobwebs. It was lying with the cobwebs 100 and more. It was rusted. It was battered, and some parts also it was missing. But he cleaned it and as he could and polished it with great. But what did he? He cleaned his weapon and polished it with very great care. He cut some pieces of pasteboard to supply the missing parts and painted them to look like steel. Now what he did? He cut some piece of pasteboard to give them the missing parts and painted it to look like steel. When they were properly fitted, they answered very well, especially when no fighting was to be done. Now, when they were properly fitted, they answered very well, and especially when no fighting was to be done. With the coat of mail, there was an old brass helmet. Now, with the coat of mail, he had an old brass helmet. It too was broken, and the straps were holding on or they are lost. Now it was also broken, and the straps it was holding as it was getting lost. But Mr. Quisana patched it and found some green ribbons which may serve instead of strap. Now Mr. Quisana, he patched it up and then found some green ribbons which served instead of strap. Instead of strap, he made it as straps. As he held it up and looked it from every side, he felt very proud to think. Now when he held it up and looked from all sides, he felt very proud to think it. His head would be adorned with so rare piece of workman. He think that his head would be adorned, means it was decorated with so rare piece of workmanship. And now a steel must be provided, for every knight must have a noble horse. Now he thought that he should have a steel, because every knight have a noble horse. the poor old creature in the barn was gaunt and thin. Now, poor old and every bony. Now, poor old creature, that is the horse in the barn, it was too lean and tired looking and thin and very bony. But he was just and stuff of a war. But he thought that it was just stuff. It was just fitted for a war horse. Very and stubborn. It was very and it was stubborn. As the old-fashioned gentleman looked at him, he fancied that no steed had ever been so beautiful as it. Now, as the horse looked at him, he thought that no other steed would be so beautiful and so swift. He will carry me. He will carry me most gallantly, he said. He declared. Miss Quisana declared himself that this horse would carry him most gallantly, he said, and I shall be proud of him. And Quisana, he would be too much proud of it. But what shall I call him? Now he started thinking that what would he call him? A horse that was ridden, but a noble knight must have an honorable and high-sounding name. Now he said horse which is ridden by a noble knight, it should give given an honorable and even a high-sounding name. So he spent 4 days in studying. Now what he did? He started spending 4 days in studying. What he should call his steed. Now he started studying for 4 days. He spent his time studying that what he would call his horse. At last he said, I have it. His name should be Rosinante. Now at last he said that he had found the name. His horse name should be Rosinante. And why did you give him that strange name? Asked the niece. Now his niece asked that why have you given that strange name? I will tell you, he answered. The word Rosin means common horse. Now, he tell that I will tell you. And now he said the word Rosin, it means common horse. And the anti in Latin, before or formerly. And anti is a Latin word. It is derived from the word before or formerly. Now, if I call my gallant steed formerly a common horse, the meaning is plain. Now, if I call my gallant horse, if I call my horse formerly a common horse, then the meaning is plain. For everybody will understand that he is now no longer common. So that everybody could understand that he is no longer common. He is very uncommon. You see. So his name shall be Rosinante. And so his name, his horse name would be Rosinante. Then he patted the horse lovingly and gently repeated, Rosinante, Rosinante. Then he patted his horse and gently called his horse Rosinante, Rosinante. He thought that if he could only find a good name for himself, he would feel like riding out and beginning his adventure for once. Now he thought that if he could find a good name for himself, he would feel that he is riding out and is beginning his adventure at once. For what more could he need? Now what more he needed? Every night, he said, has the right to put dawn at the beginning of his name. Every night, what he said, that every night it has the right to put dawn at the beginning of his name. For that is a title of honor and respect. For that, what is it? It is a title of honor and respect. Now shall I call myself Dawn, something that, but what shall it be? Now he would call himself Dawn, but what would it be? He studied this question for 8 days. Then a happy thought came to him. For 8 days he studied that question. Then a happy thought came to his mind. I will call myself Don Quixote, he cried out. Now he gave his own name, Don Quixote. And since my home is in the district of La Mancha, I shall be known throughout the world as Don Quixote de La Mancha. As he belonged from the district of La Mancha, so he thought that he would, throughout the world, he would call himself Don Quixote de La Mancha. What name can be nobler than that? He thought that it was a very noble name. What title can be more honorable? And it was even an honorable title. The good old gentleman had now mended and polished his armor and found new names for himself. Now this gentleman, what he found? He had polished his armor and then found a new name for himself also. And his steed, that means his horse, he felt himself well equipped for adventure. And he felt that his horse, all these things, when he found it, he found that now he was equipped for adventure. Thus, after weeks of labor and study, Don Quixote de la Mancha at length felt himself prepared to ride forth into the world to seek adventure. Now, after weeks of labor and study, Don Quixote de la Mancha at a very great length, he felt himself prepared to ride forward into the world to seek adventure. He waited only for suitable opportunities to put cherished plans into execution. He waited for every opportunity to put his cherished plan into execution. And now revise this lesson again in diary. Write the homework. Read the lesson again and again. That is lesson number. Revise the chapter 3. Getting ready for adventure again and again. And with this, I am ending my today's class. Goodbye.